school, and the last 10 years as the 10th, wait a minute, do I have that right? No, the last 15 years as the 10th grade principal. He got his degree, undergraduate, at Occidental College, his master's degree, and his PhD at the University of Michigan. He's had many honors. Let me just tell you about two of them. He was the University of Michigan exchange lecturer at Phipps Universität, Marburg, Germany, in 1990. And just last year, he won national recognition by the National Endowment for the Arts, being one of 16 people chosen as a summer grant and winning a grant, a summer scholar, winning a grant to study Chaucer in London, England for a month. That sounds pretty good. In addition to his teaching, he also teaches and travels with the school's tennis teams. So join me and give a warm welcome to Dr. Randolph, and don't just do something, stand there on teaching students to be human and divine. Thank you.
Hello. It says mute, but it doesn't say on and off, in fairness to me. Well, you know, you get paid the bid bucks, you got to put up with the snags and everything. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here. I am particularly thankful to Bill Furtwängler, Carol Massini, and all the good folks at the University of Michigan's Osher Lecture Series for inviting me here this morning to talk with you about what is essentially my life's work. Perhaps many of you have enjoyed such an opportunity. I hope you have. But if you're a high school English teacher, you don't get many chances to talk about your life's work when people aren't also texting underneath the desk. So I don't want to get in trouble with Carol, but I was just like, no, actually keep your phones on, bring them out. I'd love to have you live tweet this event. How many of you have Twitter accounts? You guys, you take your phones out, turn them on. We're live tweeting, okay? I'll have 2 followers. Awesome. You know, but you got to start somewhere, right? So in any case, I'd like to gauge the audience, if I may. May I? Oh, good. This is one of those sort of interactive experiences. Okay. My wife told me this story. She went to a conference, and then there was a speaker there, and the speaker told a story about having made a presentation in someplace in England, like in the Midlands or something, and it was fairly remote. And so after the presentation evening was over, he decided to take himself out to a local pub, which is, of course, a wonderful thing to do because you get to meet people. He met a nice woman, pensioner, retiree, and they struck up a wonderful conversation, and the woman asked him what he did and what he was doing there because she realized he was a Yank, and he explained, you know, I'm doing a presentation. And she leaned into him very confidentially, and she said, "Are you a real doctor or one of those medical chaps?" Now, okay, yeah. Now, how many of you really, really want to leave now? How many of you are totally turned off? Yes, I appreciate that. Just stand tall. The rest of you, you know, follow me on John Barton Rules at Twitter. But in any case, I hope that I'm not going to be too controversial today, but at the same time, I hope that I'm going to be able to entertain you. The title of my lecture is, Don't Just Do Something, Stand There, Teaching Students to be Human and Divine. If it sounds a bit metaphysical, it's intended to be. If it sounds a bit practical, that's also intended. If it sounds a bit contradictory, well, That's inevitable because my job, like most jobs, is impossibly contradictory. My job, as I understand it, is to save the world one student at a time. Oh, I like that you like that. This is going to be a fun hour for me. My job also, I describe as being an accountant and a firefighter at the same time. I need to hold trains for all stragglers and then make them run on time. Of course, when I say I really mean we, because I am speaking of, and in a disturbingly paltry way, for all teachers. This makes me very anxious, especially because my wife's a teacher and she's here. Let's be clear from the outset, I cannot in any way speak for all secondary school teachers in the humanities. I know you know that. I just want you to know that I know that you know that. What I do propose instead is to share my own experiences and perspectives as a teacher in the humanities in one eccentric secondary school, Green Hill School, and hope that my words will inspire a richer, more thorough, and perhaps more conversation about the experience of teaching and learning in the humanities at the secondary school level. Is that a deal? Deal. Wonderful. So let's roll up our sleeves, metaphorically, because it's kind of chilly. It's only April in Michigan, and we'll come back to April. Let's roll up our sleeves and get down to business. So I propose to look at teaching the humanities in the secondary schools through 6 problems. Then I want to propose a solution. You did not see that second slide. The problems I'd like to consider are these. 1, the lifeboat problem. 2, the allocation of scarce resources and values problem. 3, the little sibling problem. 4, the keeping the body and soul together problem. And 5, the zombie apocalypse problem. And 6, the recognizing evil when we see it problem. And then I'd like to offer a solution because I want to be practical and positive. So the first thing I want to do is start off with the lifeboat problem. To illustrate the situation faced by many secondary school teachers in the humanities, I'd like to use a simple ethical exercise. Some of you might recognize it. It's called the lifeboat problem. Here's how it works. Our ship is sinking fast. There is only one lifeboat available. The seas are shark-filled. If the lifeboat is overloaded, it will probably capsize and all will be lost. So it's suicide to overload the boat. This particular boat can only hold 4 people. We must deliberate on the question of who should be saved and who will perish. Here are our 6 candidates. It's like reality TV. 1, a scientist. And some of you are like, I'm invested now. An engineer. Some of you are very invested now. A math teacher. Okay, in fairness, I could have taken a lot of worse photos off of Google Images. It's surprising the number of math teachers that have been arrested for stuff and their pictures on. Sorry, math teacher jealousy. Urban Meyer and Jim Harbaugh. Oh, also an English teacher. Right. Those are our choices. It is a given that Jim Harbaugh must survive. So that's one space spoken for. And while some of you are fair-minded and would argue that Urban Meyer should be allowed to be spared because he will provide a worthy adversary for Coach Harbaugh, this English teacher considers that to be a specious and wrong-headed argument. So good night, good luck, Coach Meyer. You will not survive. This leaves 3 spaces and 4 people: a scientist, an engineer, a math teacher, and an English teacher. So the questions are, whom do you save? Please don't answer that out loud. I feel too vulnerable up here. And how do you choose? So the lifeboat problem is fundamentally an exercise in ethics, or making choices that benefit the greatest number of people while hurting the fewest number of people, or utilitarian ethics, I should say. Recognizing that there is no ideal win-win situation, we must choose who will perish and who will survive. But how will we decide? This is the point of the lifeboat problem, to make us think about our values. So I want to begin our examination of the humanities in the secondary schools by arguing that the greatest loser, inevitably, in the lifeboat problem is and has been the humanities. The reason why humanities have been the greatest loser is that the humanities, by definition, are not practical. Admit it, they aren't. But I want to add this coda, nor should they be. I told you I'd be controversial. Aside from the Harry Potter theme park, they don't build much of anything. They are impractical, impossible to account for, and notoriously elusive of bottom-line considerations. There is no way to compute value added for the humanities, at least not that I know of. There is no wins against replacement, as in baseball, though as a tennis coach, I want to believe that it's miles traveled with students, but no one's bought that. Forget about evaluation and performance tools. They are arbitrary at best. Even when the humanities do cash, as in lucrative cultural performances, like this one, these profitable efforts come in for sharp rebukes for having sold out, and that's from the humanities itself. When it comes to the humanities, apparently there is no winning for losing, because losing is the only real criteria for judging success in the humanities. Just ask Socrates. If he'd failed to drink the hemlock, he would have been the ultimate sellout, like Bob Dylan converting, or so I'm told. In his tract called The Idea of the University, Cardinal Newman maintains that the knowledge one seeks at the university should be an end in itself. The university should be institutionally and constitutionally impractical. This does not mean that Newman argues for the end of dentistry. He merely argues that the dental school is, and this might be controversial, not the university. Both should flourish. Dental school teaching a practical vocational skill, but also the university teaching an impractical skill. And that skill is knowing how to be human. Regardless of the biases and flaws in his thinking, and there are many, Newman is not incorrect to assert that the knowledge of being human is an essential matter. Without the university, without the humanities, without such knowledge, people would certainly lose an understanding of what Newman calls the relative disposition of things. He rightly warns us that not to know the relative disposition of things is the state of slaves and children. He understood our political process well before we engaged in it. Thus, he argues that by studying philosophy, literature, history, and the arts, we actually protect ourselves from de-evolution and destruction, which, when you think about it, actually does have some practical applications. Losing the game might ultimately win the match. But most folks are more practical than Cardinal Newman, and for that reason, they prefer tangible solutions to knotty problems, like the lifeboat problem. So let's return to the lifeboat problem and solve it once and for all. Okay, we have only 3 spaces and we have 4 people. Let's get down to brass tacks. Who should we save and why? Well, what about saving the folks who potentially will do the most good for the greatest number of people? Makes sense, very utilitarian. But now we have to ask, what's the good? Being practical, let's say the good involves meeting what Abraham Maslow in his famous hierarchy of needs called physiological and safety needs, and keeping us alive. For example, building shelter and infrastructure and economy, good thinking. This is what practical people engage in. Let's call them the practicals. But you might ask, if you know Maslow's work, what about the higher level needs? Love and belongingness, esteem and self-actualization. Well, these are secondary considerations to the mere practical concerns of health and safety, because you don't need to worry about esteem if you're not alive. That kind of hurts your esteem. Folks responsible for these needs are the impracticals, people like me. So whom do we save, the practicals or the impracticals? Shoot, I just personalized that. This could be painful for me. All right, but that's okay. All in favor of saving the practicals say aye. Aye, I'll speak for you. Because I don't want you to feel embarrassed or anything by speaking the truth. All those in favor of saving the impracticals say why. Why? Clearly the ayes have it. So, engineer, scientist, math teacher, congratulations. Climb aboard the SS STEM. You are the big winners. And that's sort of what it's like to teach in the secondary schools. Such a group of practical folks and big winners are the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. They collaborated on a study. Some of you might have read it. I'm sure all of you have read it, actually, when I think about it. Entitled, Engaged to Excel, producing 1 million additional college graduates with degrees in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Reading the report, I am haunted by how sad their dinner parties must be. Nonetheless, I feel compelled to share the introduction to their study with you, so please bear with me. This isn't exactly the best writing, I think. I have to use my STEM voice. Throughout the 20th century, science, technology, and higher education were drivers of innovation in the U.S. economy. The rapid expansion of research and development enterprise after World War II led to strong economic performance, good jobs, and thriving new industries driven by new technologies. We all know this. The United States is now putting its future at risk by forfeiting its historical strengths in STEM education. This is when it affects me. The proportion of STEM degrees among all college graduates has been falling for the past decade. Without action, it is likely that this proportion will continue to drop as groups that have historically earned fewer STEM degrees on average than white men become a larger majority of college students. Now, that might have something to do with problems other than STEM education, but those aren't addressed here. As has occurred previously with the 1862 federal support for the establishment of land-grant colleges, the University of Michigan, for example, and almost a century later with the response to the launch of Sputnik, the nation has reached a decision point. The United States could renew its commitment to education, and especially STEM education, or it could risk creating a permanent economic gap among American workers at a time of dramatic demographic transition and enhanced global competition. Wow. Funding STEM education is now on par with funding the land-grant universities and the space race. The Council recommends investing big money in programs that will generate 1 million STEM graduates, and that's because they believe that there will be a shortage of STEM workers. Apparently, STEM education is the new prodigal son. So, kill the fatted calf, and let the homecoming celebration begin. While you're killing the fatted calf, please take a second and wave goodbye to your old friend, the English teacher. But don't be too sad, because you know in his heart he is happy to be the one sacrificed. And anyway, you're giving him the chance to do the thing that he's always wanted to do, to turn his learning into life. He is achieving that position that he's always wanted to achieve, and that is to be smug. How does one look smug? All right. He is smug in the knowledge that he and he alone, that is, barring Isaac Asimov, can draw on hundreds of thousands of pages of reading to deliver the perfect quote, which captures the absurd, bittersweet pathos of his existential doom. To be or not to be, that is the question, which is, by the way, a feminine ending. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of trouble and by opposing end them. See, Ralph Williams is not going to be the only one to come in here and quote Shakespeare. I was determined to make that a fact. Respice finem, English teacher. And remember, no one forced you to be an English major in college. The choice was all yours. You made your bed, now you lie in it. Which brings us to the allocation of scarce resources and values problem. Even as the English teacher delivers his moving soliloquy, those whom the gods of praxis have blessed to sail off to a brave new world, I'll call it STEM land, why not? We can see the results of STEM education with our own eyes, and this is me being jealous. Computers, lasers, rockets, medical breakthroughs, the stuff that you're looking at up here, unimportant stuff that's not really all that exciting and not magical at all. I walk by my science teachers' classrooms and they're blowing stuff up, and kids are going, ooh, ah, and then they come to English class. We're doing Chaucer and Middle English today. Well. Those guys, they make things like heated driveways, MRIs, Bluetooth technology, sulfa drugs, Dippin' Dots, and Uber. No wonder the current administration is keen to extend them what Joseph Pirro in Education Weeks calls alpha status. For Pirro, alpha status is achieved when the lion's share of the resources are invested in you. He totals up the STEM investment. Here's how it goes. He adds up $700 million in federal government, the federal government spends on science and math education programs within NASA and the National Science Foundation, and other agencies to what's already earmarked by individual states for STEM programs. And a picture emerges of where a lot of tax money is, he claims, rightfully going. And let's not forget President Obama, my old classmate at Occidental College, by the way, Occidental College, class of '83. Let's not forget his $250 million public-private initiative to recruit and train more STEM teachers, as well as the U.S. Department of Education's Race to the Top grants competition, which gives bonus points for applications that stress STEM learning. We're talking about $1 billion, about $1 billion in government investment alone. This isn't even counting the considerable private investment available. And please notice that this is only for STEM education, not even for STEM research. But actually, $1 billion is a vast underestimation. Consider this report about this federal investment in STEM. It claims that President Obama requested $2.9 billion for the 2015 federal budget. Let's not stop there. Let's look at who's funding STEM report in the aptly named website, STEM Reports. Here we find $4 billion invested across 13 agencies, and this still hasn't taken private funding into consideration. The article concludes by presenting some data on where folks are finding funding, some of it being private. It explains that 40.9% of STEM educators surveyed responded that they seek grants from private foundations. So that's a lot. I mean, I'm not a math person, as you've guessed, from the math teacher photo I put up. But that's a lot, isn't it? Many detailed Apple grants, PTC funding, and contributions from individuals. STEM educators cite STEM grants from small companies like Vernier and larger companies like Google, Microsoft. They even tell stories of grants from the Red Sox Foundation. Oh, Red Sox. Go Tigers. And the Monterey Bay Aquarium. The report asks, so who's funding STEM? It looks like we all are. It's great. And the federal government is spending $3.4 billion in STEM. But it is even more inspiring to hear stories of companies, individuals, foundations investing to help educate our next generation of scientists and engineers. Yay. Wow. Awesome sauce. Well, that's great. And I support all of that because I like using my Bluetooth clicker. Let's just check for a second and see how the humanities are doing. By comparison, two tables should tell the whole story. Here is a slide which displays the funding levels for the National Endowment of the Humanities, the NEH, which is the preeminent funder, either public or private, for the humanities. Please note that the y-axis is measured in millions, not billions of dollars. From a high of $2.5 billion in the early 90s, the funding has dropped to under $1.5 billion in 2015. So this doesn't take into account the arts, so let's take a look at the arts. Here is arts and humanities funding, all right, across a public-private humanities arts spectrum. From a high point in 2009 of about $3.5 billion, we were less than $1.5 billion in 2012. Ouch. And I should also mention, quite sadly, that I was among the last of the American high school teachers who was able to receive a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to study or participate in an institute or seminar abroad. Because of funding considerations, now the National Endowment of the Humanities no longer funds excursions and institutes and seminars like the one that I took part in and that I will share with you at the end. It looks as though the English teacher is not the only agent of the humanities left drowning in the tempest-tossed, shark-infested seas. Indeed, it looks as though all of the humanities is heading very fast to Davy Jones's locker. But we have already established that we're okay with this development, with these decisions. The allocation of scarce resources is the exercise of power, and we've already justified that exercise of power. STEM is practical, so STEM is alpha. Alphas get money. But hold on a second. Let's move beyond the justifications, which are obviously legitimate, to the ramifications of STEM funding. If this weren't a zero-sum game, it wouldn't matter. But almost all of the funding rhetoric, especially the current political talk, suggests that it is a zero-sum game, which means that the humanities need to give up funding. As far as STEM funding goes, it seems to me that the rule is what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine. By choosing to privilege the practical disciplines, STEM, over the impractical ones, the humanities, we inevitably, irrevocably change the human landscape in ways academic, economic, and cultural. But hang on, you say. This is far afield from our original topic, the humanities and secondary education. And of course, you're right, I'm sorry. I apologize for the excursus. But it is absolutely essential to understanding our next problem, which is the little sibling problem. One of my heroes is Sir Kenneth Robinson. Anyone know who he is? Oh, I saw a hand up. I hope you like him as I do. He's a much better speaker than I. So if you take your phones out and you YouTube, or you get his TED Talk up there, I think you'd really enjoy your afternoon here. He's very funny. But he is an educationalist. But he's an educationalist with a difference. Here's me, again, putting the serrated knife in. He is actually a good guy for an educationalist. I think he's a good guy because he speaks the truth about the American educational system. And the truth is this: the American educational system does not serve American students well. It serves students the way it wants to. His primary accusation is that our current system is antiquated, created by and for 19th century industrial concerns. It is skills-oriented, vocational, and most of all, it's oppressive. What we need, he argues, is a creative, intuitive, open approach, perhaps not even a system at all. Check out my school's mission statement, and I think my school is about as progressive and forward-thinking as any I've seen. Still, it's college first, life second. In my professional world, values and the goals of the university become the needs, values, and goals of my school. If you look at the Common Core standards for English language, that's so small, but, and you're going to have to trust me on this, I guess, everything there in that highlighted passage is directed towards college use, towards college practice. So when the university invests in STEM, college prep schools are not far behind. My school was the same way. We built a new science wing, in fact. And it was way overdue, so it's great, but that's what we do. When the university divests from the humanities, college prep schools will or not be far behind. The problem of American secondary education, according to Sir Kenneth, is that it is too much the little sibling of the university. Apparently, our preeminent function, especially a college prep school like my own, would be to impart college prep skills and pre-sorting and pre-selecting for competitive college admissions boards. Otherwise, it seems like there's no abiding mission. Consider for a moment the fact stated above that humanities majors, or well, it was before I edited that out, but it's true, humanities majors have been decreasing since the 1960s. Couple that with an increase in the number of students taking humanities AP courses in high school. What does that add up to? How does that add up? I wish I could say it's increasing because there are more and more students who find their teachers engaging and the subject illuminating. But in all likelihood, the reason why they're taking more AP courses is to try and bulk up the challenge quotient of their high school transcripts in preparation for college admissions season. And the result of that? Increased competition without sufficient means to judge the inevitable photo finishes. Take a look. This is going to be small, I fear. Oh, that is small. You're going to have to trust me again on this. You didn't know that you were going to have to do so much trusting when you came in here today. It's like a high ropes course for your ethics. Take a look at the college acceptance rates at Ivy League schools. Here's what I will tell you about that very, very small slide. All but 2 schools are under 10% acceptance rate. The only 2 that aren't are Cornell and Penn. Does that mean that they're slackers? Do they need to force those down so that they are not the laughingstock of the Ivy League? And you know what? They are not the worst offenders. And I'm sorry, I'm going to call them offenders. Earlier this month, Stanford boasted of an acceptance rate of under 5%. I'm sorry, but I call this a mess. What is the cause of this mess? The little sibling problem, a big little sibling problem. But what if the secondary schools added another mission? Because I can't, work against that mission. That would be working against my school, and I love my school, and I want to work with my school. And it benefits my students. But what if we added another mission to college skills and college sorting? What if the secondary school started to play the role which is being abandoned by many universities, which is to say, to be the bringer of sweetness and light, but updated? Perhaps secondary schools could now be a version of the old liberal arts college. If there were any practical justification for putting an English teacher on the lifeboat, it would be to address Maslow's higher needs of love, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. If we have learned anything in our post-9/11 world, it should be and should have been that the capacity to survive as a species will most certainly depend on a species believing that there is a reason to survive beyond mere survival. And that leads me to the keeping body and soul together problem. Pardon me while I Marco Rubio. I hope that that's going to get this 1 million hits on YouTube. Sorry, I got to get attention. I'm a high school teacher. In the April 11th, 2005 edition of the New York Times, opinion writer Frank Bruni shared his dismay at a bizarre and upsetting development in Palo Alto, California, which is where my wife hails from. He tells of seeing men in orange vests stationed along the rail lines that separate the main drag of Palo Alto from the university proper. By that I mean Stanford University. The purpose of the vested sentries was to discourage suicides by high school students. Indeed, Palo Alto was experiencing what have come to be known, there's actually a phrase for this now, come to be known as suicide clusters, in which the death of classmates takes on a horrifically viral attraction. And there's a phrase for this, sadly, suicide contagion. Interestingly enough, the immediate response was very Maslowian, physiological and safety needs. They were being met by stationing adults along the track to physically dissuade teens from ending lives which they felt were too painful to continue. There is a logic to this response, but it must be matched with an admission of its pathos. This is an absurdly insufficient response. This reality was not lost on Pally Jr. Carolyn Walworth, who wrote a stunning expose and call to arms in the Palo Alto Online News. With the clarity, grace, and power that must have made her English teachers very proud, Miss Walworth cuts right to the heart of the matter. From elementary school, she explained, both she and her classmates had been herded into an educational system bent on sorting and selecting them to achieve optimal benefits. Middle school was dominated by math tracking, and then came high school. Her description and the beauty of her writing demand a full reading. Quote, upon entering high school, I was genuinely interested in learning. I wanted to use my education to achieve my goals and to help solve problems in the world. A month or two into my freshman year, I began to feel the pressure building. It crushes you on the inside to see what appears to be the majority of your classmates acing tests with flying colors while you're just doing all right. A piece of you cringes when you hear that your friend has been prepping for the SAT with classes since last summer and that they're already scoring a 2,000. You can't help slip into the system of competitive insanity related to college admissions to achieve social normalcy. You learn that it is okay and necessary to have great apprehension regarding your grades. You focus on getting straight A's. You go to bed at 1 a.m. every night, and I can testify to that as a father of two daughters who are both in college now, only to wake up a few hours later, earlier if you have morning practice for your sport, in an effort to get your excessive homework finished each night. But at least you have the weekends to pursue your own interests, right? No, there's another surfeit of homework waiting for you on Friday night, plus SAT practice. Of course, we're expected to maintain a social life and spend adequate time with our families as well, end quote. We could write this expose off to youth, to privilege, to insecurity, to being out of touch with the real world, to demonstrating weaknesses already that the competitive system will effectively sort out, or what you might call thinning the herd. We could do that. We could ignore this individual critique of a larger system and the associated suicide contagion clusters that probably found root in this sentiment. But we should not. In a meaningful coincidence, studying this dynamic between what he called the dispositional element and the broken but determined system, Stanford professor Philip Zimbardo engaged in one of the most controversial and instructive experiments ever performed in behavioral psychology. It became known as the Stanford Prison Experiment. How many of you are familiar with that? Very good, excellent. And there was just a movie that came out this year about it, and also about the Milgram experiment. I commend them both to you. They're both powerful and responsibly done. In it, Zimbardo intended to explore the dispositional and situational relations between the subject and the system as it relates to evil. Simply, is evil caused by misguided systems which harm individual subjects, or do evil agents abuse the systems to harm individual subjects? His conclusion, again, is somewhat controversial. It was that individual subjects to broken systems become dispositional agents for evil. Let me restate that. If you are caught up in an evil system, you are likely to become evil. It's just that simple. In other words, they do what everyone else around them does so that they might realize the protection of belongingness or the herd. Speaking out, criticizing the system, as Zimbardo noted, rarely happens because the threat to oneself is just too great. Heroic actions by individual prisoners in his experiment failed to change the prison system there that he was running, because fellow prisoners failed to overcome their own belongingness needs and band against the oppressive authority to effect change. Not merely was a broken system left unchallenged, nor the rights of individuals left unprotected, but an entire idea, the concept of heroism, which means its very possibility, was left to die. Just a mile or two from Jordan Hall, where Zimbardo held his Stanford prison experiment, the Palo Alto train tracks serve as a site for broken subjects who could not hack the system to extricate themselves from it. But Carolyn Walworth is speaking out and standing up to the system. Quote, "I am sick and tired of seeing my classmates struggle with challenges of being teenagers and having to deal with this lunacy on top of it. I feel nothing but despair and empathy when I hear of another student who is suicidal or depressed. I want students in the district to be content, enjoy their lives, and view schools as places where they can come and receive legitimate support for any of their problems." In case her readers have failed to grasp the stakes, she lays it out plainly, and she lays it out powerfully on the line. Students are gasping for air, lacking the time to draw a measly breath in. We are the product of a generation of Palo Altans that so desperately wants us to succeed, but does not understand our needs. We are not teenagers. We are lifeless bodies in a system that breeds competition, hatred, discourages teamwork, and genuine learning. We lack sincere passion. We are sick. Then she asks the most heroic, in Zimbardo's formulation, question. Why is it not getting through to the community? Why does this insanity that is our school district continue? The answer is all too obvious, because the system works. Ms. Walworth's powerful writing testifies to the success of the system that is all too effective at culling subjects so that her hometown university can achieve an admissions rate of under 5%, reported with great ceremony and pride. But the power of her voice is negligible compared to the competitive advantages afforded by this inhumane system. At the end of the day, she and her classmates are merely acceptable losses. No one will truly heed her impassioned cry. Well, aside from some pats on the back and some window dressing, the system will not adjust in any meaningful way, at least not in any way that's meaningful to Palo Alto high school students. At issue, she says, is genuine learning and sincere passion. They are what the system lacks, attacks, and destroys. They are presumed to be sustaining and nourishing. But what can she mean by genuine learning and sincere passion? The educationalist's knee-jerk response would be relevance, that students need to see the relevance of their learning. But I read her word choice as much more profound and unsettling. Myself, I'm fascinated by her turn of phrase, sincere passion. In my view, sincerity is a dynamic, by which I mean it's a machine. It has two parts. It has an inside and an outside part. And both of them have to agree for you to be sincere. When you are not agreeing between your inside and outside, you are anxious. You are mentally reserving something. You are outright lying. What she seems to want is an alignment between how she feels and how she is expected to perform. Maybe that's youthful indiscretion or naivete on her part, but I hope not. Here, her feelings and their appreciation are the critical variables. As for passion, the current usage of the word has wandered so far from its root meaning as to be nearly meaningless. But I think Ms. Walworth is actually using the word properly. The root of passion in Latin is passio, passero, which means to suffer, hence the passion of Christ. So really, passion means suffering. To have passion, then, involves finding something for which you are willing to suffer. Her complaint, then, seems to be that she and her classmates are made to suffer for reasons they neither choose nor understand. All she wants to know is why. In her perfect world, she could align her feelings about suffering with the way she expects to with the way the world expects her to, allows her to, and rewards her for performing. Well, we might respond to Miss Walworth by saying, we know what you're going through, and we know it's a tough time, but all of the suffering one day will make sense. It will all add value to your work. You'll understand. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Work on your grit skills. Trust the system. You'll be better for it. Got to go to the left hand now. Think of it as leavening. But the truth is that most suffering, and I think we have a veteran enough group here to agree with me, most suffering is meaningless and stupid, which means that it is ultimately evil. It dehumanizes. But, and this is the key point, and I know this is a veteran enough group to understand this, not all suffering dehumanizes. We know this from touring museums, art galleries, reading texts, and conversing with other people, that some suffering can be purposeful, defining, even ennobling, that it can strangely humanize us. What Miss Walworth wants, no, what she demands is a meaningful, purposeful, ennobling education, one absolutely and manifestly dedicated to helping her confront suffering and make sense out of it, one that teaches her to love and understand, to adapt and grow, to live and die in the cycle of nature, not in existential despair in front of an Amtrak train. Among all of the problems faced by teachers, and I am not being dramatic or hyperbolic here, is the keeping body and soul together problem. Big data might indicate that suicide clusters will come and go like Halley's Comet. Perhaps Google might even write an algorithm for suicide clusters, predicting when they will happen, by what means, where, based on race, class, economic status, preferred snack foods, etc. The same has been done already for, quote, situational crime prevention, end quote, or predictive policing. As another of my heroes, Yevgeny Morozov, explains in To Save Everything, click here. Perhaps internet solutionists and cyber utopians can figure out how to nudge all high school students towards safe mental and emotional health. But I doubt it, at least from my experience with Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Yik Yak. You don't yak? Come on. All right, we'll work afterwards on it. My argument is that the prevention and salvation of this problem resides in the realm of the humanities, which means that it is the responsibility of people like me, the humanities teachers. We are the ones who must solve this problem, because humanities teachers are the ones who must weave the safety net into the culture. Fortunately for them, which is to say us, we have the best tools to build genuine learning machine. And our purpose in life is really to teach one lesson plan and one lesson plan only. And that is how to manifest, understand, and deal with sincere passion. To explain this puffed up claim, I need to reference David Foster Wallace's brilliant commencement address to Kenyon College grads. Anyone familiar with this? What is water? Correct me if I'm wrong. At the beginning of the address, Wallace tells a little parable. Here is the parable, paraphrased. An older fish swims up to two younger fish. He greets them by saying, "How's the water?" They look at one another, nod at him, and then swim on. A few seconds later, one of the younger fish turns to the other and says, "What's water?" Younger fish. Mr. Wallace's point is that we do not always think about the medium of our existence. And while that ignorance does not seem to have harmed the two younger fish up to this point, such knowledge might one day come in handy, most notably if one of the two younger fish turns out to be a fish out of water. Didn't see that coming, did you? And that is my point. That whether we like it or not, whether we accept it or not, the humanities is water. We can deny it, divert from it, disrupt it, but it doesn't change the fact that we swim in it, we live in it, we would perish without it. On the evening of September 12th, 2008, at his home in Claremont, California, David Foster Wallace took his own life, leaving me and my colleagues to keep asking, how's the water? I found out because one of my students was a student of his, called me that night. For reasons that might be scientific, chemical, or philosophical, existential, he could no longer manage the passion of this life. A troubled person, he was nonetheless a person. Indeed, in many ways, he is the quintessential human, both good and ill together. He could no longer manage the real problem of keeping body and soul together. If you are tempted to think that David Foster Wallace was merely a troubled, perhaps even tainted genius, or that Ms. Walworth and her pally classmates are outliers in an otherwise working system called the American Secondary Educational System, consider this contention by Gerald Kay, MD, Professor and Chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Wright State University School of Medicine. There is no question that all of the national surveys we have at our fingertips show a distinct rise in the number of mental health problems. Indeed, in the past 15 years, depression has doubled and suicide tripled. According to a survey from the Anxiety Disorders Association of America, universities and colleges also have seen an increase in students seeking services for anxiety disorders. He adds that other students who might have clinical anxiety or depression still suffer. According to the 2000 American College Health Association survey, 45% of women and 36% of men felt so depressed that it was difficult to function. American high school students may be falling behind other developed nations in math science scores. And I've got the tables, which I edited out, and I'm happy to show them to you if you want to see. And the answer might be to reallocate significant funding to STEM education. But my reading of Miss Walworth's letter, an honest consideration of this epidemic which has descended on the most academically promising American students. And let's not make any mistake about this. I'm talking only about the most privileged, the most promising kids, not the at-risk kids, but the most privileged ones, leads me to conclude that there are bigger fish to fry. Which brings me to the zombie apocalypse problem. Another of my heroes is Professor Sherry Turkle. Is that name familiar to you? Anyone know Professor Turkle? Yeah, she's brilliant. She's the only one who could break up my marriage. Oh, shoot. I forgot you were here. Darn it, just between us in the front row. Her books about the effect of technology on human subjectivity are both profound and frightening. In her book, Alone Together, she pulled research data together to argue that we have effectively zombified ourselves by turning technology from a tool into a prosthetic. Sleep deprivation, did you get that? Those of you who are tweeting this live? Okay. That's okay. Disrupted communication and, most importantly, an erosion of, though perhaps we would be more apt to say an assault on, empathy. All of these major problems have called into question what it means to be human. Here is an excerpt from her most recent book, Reclaiming Conversation. It is an illustrative rant from, of all places, a comedian, Louis C.K. Please allow me to read it in full. I have to Rubio again for this. Kids don't look at people when they talk to them. They don't build the empathy, or they don't build empathy. You know, kids are mean, and it's because they're trying it out. They look at a kid and they go, "You're fat." And then they see the kid's face scrunch up and they go, "Ooh, that doesn't feel good," to make that person feel like that. But when they write, "You're fat," then they go, "That was fun, I like that." You need an ability to just be yourself and not be doing something. That's what the phones are taking away. The ability to just sit there. That's just being a person. Because beneath everything in your life, there is that thing, that empty thing, that we're forever empty. That knowledge that it's all for nothing and you're all alone. It's down there. And sometimes when things clear away and you're not watching and you're in your car, you start going, "Ooh, here it comes, that I'm alone." Like it starts to visit you just like this sadness. Life is tremendously sad, and that's why we text and drive. Pretty much 100% of the people are driving and texting. They are killing and murdering each other with their cars. But people are willing to risk taking their life and ruining another because they don't want to be alone for a second. I was alone in my car, and a Bruce Springsteen song came on. And I heard it, and it gave me a kind of fall back to school depression feeling. Hey. And it made me feel really sad. And I went, okay, I'm getting really sad. And so I had to get the phone out and write hi to like 50 people. Anyway, I started to get that sad feeling, and I reached for the phone, and then I said, "You know what? Don't. Just be sad. Just stand in the way of it and let it hit you like a truck." So I pulled over and cried like a baby. I cried so much, it was so beautiful. Sadness is poetic. You are lucky to live sad moments. And then I had happy feelings, because when you let yourself have sad feelings, when you let yourself have sad feelings, you have antibodies that come rushing in to meet those sad feelings. But because we don't want to feel the first feeling of sad, we push it away with our phones. So we never feel completely happy or completely sad. You just feel sort of satisfied with your products, and then you die. So that's why I don't want to buy phones for my kids. Though not an academic, Louis C.K. captures the idea which is fundamental to Professor Turkle's research. Her thesis goes like this: there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. The difference is the confidence in being human. And we build confidence in being human by working at the value of being human, by engaging in conversations, face-to-face, for better or worse, giving time as a gift to fellow human beings. What transpires across technology is not proper conversation, but the simulacrum or model of conversation. Telephone calls, emails, texts, Skypes, FaceTime, these are poor stand-ins for the plenary and full contextualized experience of face-to-face human interaction. But you might argue, well, artificial intelligence has successfully recreated the confidence in being human at a machine level. So we might as well give in to this tsunami of technological disruption. Perhaps this is true in a manner of speaking, but at the end of the day, it still only constructs a simulacrum of human beingness based on logic and emotion taken from big data. The imitation is astounding, but it is no more than an imitation. The problem comes in as we approach singularity, the moment when AI can think for itself and teach itself in ways that closely are aligned with human behavior. Science fiction has been preparing us for this moment since 1920, when Karl Čapek wrote the play R.U.R. and coined the term robot. And it is nearly upon us, as Professor Turkle documents. That problem is not a confidence in human being issue. It is a letting oneself be fooled by a cheap imitation of what it means to be human issue. No doubt you are registering the hesitancy in my tone. You can tell that I am unsure about the future of humanity, and that I would seem to be assigning some sort of blame to technology itself, and perhaps to STEM by association. But I must pull back and qualify my position. Though I agree wholeheartedly with Louis C.K. and Professor Turkle, I am no Luddite. In fact, I am an early adopter of tech for educational purposes at my school. I love the magic of technology, which, reminds me, we need to take a selfie, all of us here. Is that okay? Right there. How many of you have photobombed before? Good, this is going to be a grand new experience for you. Okay. On 3, say YOLO. Where am I? Oh, here I am. You can't see me. My parents won't believe I'm actually here. 1, 2, 3, YOLO. What? Yeah, baby. That goes up on, well, I'll wait till the end of the lecture. You're more important to me, hypocrite. But I am, actually, an early adopter. I loved, and I am going to put that up, by the way. So do I have to get all of your signatures? Or can I get one assent that you're all allowed to? Thank you. You're in my life, and so I feel like we're all family. You might not want that, though. I dominate the table at Thanksgiving. I love the whiz-bang effect of delivering an amazing image of the Victoria Falls to my post-colonial studies class. I love the power of comparing the compositional significance of John Gower's Armada portrait to a Kandinsky portrait on my smartboard. And especially I love the unbelievable experience of turning digital pages in quartos 1 through 4 of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which are housed in the British Library. These are extraordinary feats of educational magic. We can literally take flights of fancy without ever leaving the room. But all of this comes at a price, and that price is the zombification of our students. How can I win over my students to a flight of fancy when their heart rates are literally rising because they feel a ping on their phones, and they know that if they don't answer it within 2 minutes, that there will be consequences? This is our new social digital reality. Pings require immediate answers because no answer is now an answer. Opting out of digital communication is not really an option for most teens whose world is virtual as much as or more than real. Consequently, more and more people, young people, sleep with their phones in their hands, even though the screen affects their melatonin, which in turn affects their sleep. Phones, in essence, promote sleep deprivation. Yet schools are hesitant to factor technology into the problems of being a student today because they are so techno-positive, so techno-beholden, that they cannot bring themselves to admit that MOOCs and distance learning might be a part of the problem rather than the solution. My hero, Yevgeny Morozov, calls this attitude cyber-utopianism. Another hero, Neil Postman, calls it technopoly. We were warned about this phenomenon long ago by another of my heroes, Alan Turing, the father of AI. In a recent biopic entitled The Imitation Game, it hinted at this phenomenon, but it didn't really ask us to consider the relevance of the question the way Mr. Turing himself did. To demonstrate the growing sophistication of AI, he invented an ingenious test called the Turing test. Why not? Here is how the test works. Human judges sit at terminals and type in messages that are intended to be conversations with another entity. Answers return back to the judge's screens, which prompt more messages and more responses, and so on and so on. What the judges don't know and must determine is whether the responses to their comments questions are one of the various AIs competing for the best AI, or a human agent interacting however they choose to interact, which is to say a human way. So the judges are not merely judging one AI against another to see which is the most human, but they are also trying to see if they can determine which interaction is with a human agent. Consequently, there are 2 prizes to a Turing test. 1, the most human AI, and 2, the most human human. Because there are a number of human agents competing to be the most human human, you can imagine this prize is one of the most coveted, probably ever, in the history of the world. Think about it. What strategy does one use to convey that one is not a machine, but in fact, one is absolutely human? Do we act more elusive, more elusive, forthright, comical, sad, profound, random, coherent? How do we act human when we are so used to just being human? If the Turing test teaches us anything, it's that we no longer have the luxury of merely being human. That time is past. If we don't figure out some more self-conscious way to be human, then there will be no difference between machines imitating being human and humans being human. Is that really what we're recruiting 1 million new STEM majors to accomplish? I submit that our zombification problem lies not in the quantum leaps taken forward by technology and by AI, but rather the foolish choices that we make to act more like machines than human beings. Our technology is no longer a tool to solve a problem. As I said before, it's now a prosthetic device which we have adapted to in some sort of weird anti-human symbiosis. We can avoid boredom, sadness, empathy, and the messiness of life thanks to listicles, memes, and life hacks. We have achieved the event horizon. To quote Shakespeare in The Tempest, "O brave new world with such people in it." But interestingly enough, in the same play, he has the spirit Ariel sing another mesmerizing song. "Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes, nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange." Here is where we get our term sea change. Silicon Valley types are constantly trying to update the parlance with their own neologisms like disruption. But the terms don't match up. A sea change involves a mysterious process that leads to redemption, whereas a disruption merely requires the bullying of a bunch of young, narcissistic, cyber-utopian toffs. Sorry. Built up rage. A sea change redeems all. Disruption is intended to displace the existing knowledge monopolies and replace them with new knowledge monopolies helmed by the disruptors themselves. In other words, a retrenchment, old wine in new bottles. Remember the Apple 1984 Big Brother commercial? Who is Big Brother now? And remember Google's motto, "Don't be evil"? Well, who's evil now? Which brings us to the recognizing evil when we see it problem. One of the limitations of science is its preference for measuring things. Evil is a profound example. Science cannot fathom evil unless it redefines evil in terms which it can quantify in some fashion. Professor Simon Baron-Cohen makes such a maneuver in his book, The Science of Evil. Unable to get a handle on evil, Professor Baron-Cohen prefers the term empathy instead because, quote, "Unlike the concept of evil," he explains, "empathy has explanatory power. Empathy he can measure somehow. The humanities have no such limitations. The humanities embrace contradiction, impracticality, and the mystery of the universe. Indeed, poets celebrate it, like John Keats, when he lauds Shakespeare's talent for negative capability. Keats defines negative capability as the ability to hold opposing positions in suspension without resolution. Shakespeare himself describes this phenomenon as the mingled yarn. Typical of his inscrutable ways, Shakespeare puts one of the most important statements of his poetic sensibility into the mouth of a nearly anonymous character, known only as First Lord in All's Well That Ends Well. "The web of our life is of a mingled yarn, good and ill together. Our virtues would be proud if our faults whipped them not, and our crimes would despair if they were not cherished by our virtues. Things are known by their opposites, good by evil, pride by humility, selves by others. These antinomies need not be resolved. In fact, they can't be. Much to his credit, graphic artist M.C. Escher rises above his mathematical training to understand this phenomenon brilliantly. His extraordinary print, Circle Limit 4, renders for the eye the poetic sensibility that Shakespeare rendered for the ear. If you look closely, you will see angels in white and demons in black." Is it apparent? That guy's brilliant, isn't he? Just teasing about the mathematician thing. They literally define one another for your eyes. And they must, and as they must, for your mind. In the Lucifer effect, which I spoke about earlier, Professor Zimbardo cites Escher's optical illusion as a fundamental thesis for his work clarifying the relationship of evil to being human. For Professor Zimbardo's purposes, the image provides three important ideas. First, the world is filled with both good and evil. Was, is, always will be. Second, the barrier between good and evil is permeable and nebulous. And third, it is possible for the angels to become devils, and perhaps more difficult to conceive, for devils to become angels. I guess that explains Wernher von Braun and NASA. That illusion worked with this crowd. Then, like many scientists who attempt to apply scientific methodology to philosophical abstraction, he labors to redefine the concept through component parts which afford some measurability. Terms like essentialist, incrementalist, dispositional, situational. But Professor Zimbardo is not just a scientist, as he makes clear in his book. He is a pilgrim, and he is trying to redeem himself for sins that he felt he committed in conducting the Stanford prison experiments. About this, he is very clear. So in a manner refreshingly literary, he proposes to take his readers on a journey, a voyage through good and evil. He warns us, though, to hang on to our hats because we might get shaken up along the way. Quote, "In the course of our voyage through good and evil, I will ask you to reflect on three issues. How well do you really know yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses? Does your self-knowledge come from reviewing your behavior in familiar situations or from being exposed to totally new settings where your old habits are changed? In the same vein, how well do you really know the people with whom you interact daily? Your family, your friends, your coworkers, and lover? One thesis of this book is that most of us know ourselves only from limited experiences in familiar situations that involve rules, laws, policies, and pressures that constrain us. But what happens when we are exposed to totally new and unfamiliar settings where our habits don't suffice? The old you might not work as expected when the ground rules changed." End quote. Engaging in experiments like the Stanford prison experiment would be one way of challenging ourselves to see if our humanity is fixed as hoped. Travel might be another way. Being visited by some unwanted change would be another, though certainly less desirable. And then another way would be to immerse oneself in the study of difference. Different people, different cultures, different thinking, which is the humanities. All right, if I may, can I skip ahead for a minute to give you the solution, because I don't want you to be left without a solution. The solution is a pilgrimage, right? And to jump right to the end, I believe that the solution is, or lies in, or is embodied in reading of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And so I propose to do that if I can, very quickly. Can you read that? All righty. Well, you can enjoy the picture. May I read it for you then? One that April, with his shorest sota, the drucht of March had perced to the rota, and bothered every vine in switch liqueur, of which virtue engendered is the floor. When Zephyrus ake with his sway to breath and spirit hath in every holt and hath, the tenderer croppes and the younge son, hath in the ram his halve course irona. And smalle fooles maken melodie, that slapen all the nicht with open ear. So pricketh him nature in hier courages, then langen folk to go on pilgrimages, and Palmeras for to seken strange strandes, to ferne hallways, couth in sondere landes. And specially from every shirezinde of England to Canterbury they wende, the holy blissful martyr for to seke, that him hath holpen one that they were seke. Right, so I'm going to wrap up here by suggesting to you that Chaucer's pilgrimage is one in which we're all invited to tell stories, and that our stories are the things that connect us. If I could just finish with this last paragraph. Chaucer's pilgrimage is led by a host who is both innkeeper and the body of Christ. On the literal level, he proposes a contest whereby everyone is a storyteller and everyone is a partaker in every other pilgrim's story. But on a figurative level, he also arranges an opportunity for the pilgrims and all of us to redeem ourselves through stories. Some of the stories, like the Knight's Tale, have moral resonance, while others, like the Miller's Tale, remain among the best dirty jokes told in English, middle or otherwise. We can talk about that at lunch if you want. Even though Chaucer never finishes his tales, he achieves something very important. He achieves the creation of a machine whereby we may construct and reconstruct ourselves as travelers along a path that serves to provide genuine learning and sincere passion. And that is a path taken with fellow human beings which seek to understand, entertain, and help save one another. Towards the end of the Canterbury Tales, the cook, who is a notorious drunk but makes a terrific white sauce, falls off his horse. Though roundly teased, he is nonetheless helped back onto his horse so that in the end all may continue on their pilgrimage to Canterbury together, telling stories, making stories, being stories, all along the way to see the light and to be redeemed together. Now can you see why I love being an English teacher? So how's the water? Thank you. And may your pilgrimage be filled with light.
We'll take some questions from one side and the other, so we'll rotate back and forth.
Oh, I'm going to, is this over here or?
No, the mic will, the mic will pick up the questioner.
Sounds good.
Hello.
Hi there.
In addition to the STEM program, isn't there also a STEAM program?
There is.
Which includes the arts? Could you, in some schools, could you talk about that?
Yeah, I wish I could. Can you hear me? I feel like I've walked out of range or something. Yeah, that's an excellent point. There is something new that has developed in recent years. I couldn't speak to exactly the point of origin, but STEAM is now becoming a popular acronym to sort of fit the arts in, because of the recognition that creativity is absolutely essential for our economy. I think we all recognize that as well. The thing that I like to ask my students is, how did Steve Jobs change the world? Through his coding? No, Steve Jobs changed the world by figuring out how to take a tool and make it essential to the lives of human beings. He made it aesthetic. He made it inevitable. His was a design function. I mean, it was Bill Gates, right, who came up with Windows and the operating system. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, although to be controversial and maybe to pique your attention, I was interested in comparing the priority put on STEM to the humanities. But the point I still want to make is, even with respect to STEAM, it doesn't address the issues, at least in my experience as a secondary school teacher, that it doesn't engage the real problems of the system as I understand it. I don't know if that's at all helpful, but if you want to have I'd be glad to do that afterwards. But thank you for that good question.
I had a question for you, if I could. What types of steps have you taken at your school to address some of the concrete things that you're actually doing to address these issues?
Oh, I think that's a great question, because I mean, one always wants to be practical, right, in the real world. Otherwise, we would all just be on think tanks all the time. But for myself, as a person who is a coach, who is a teacher, a full-time teacher, who is a great principal, which means I'm a dean of students who has to deal with all sorts of issues. And I'm sorry to say that every year I have to visit students in the hospital for problems relating to mental health. And sadly, I've had to deliver eulogy before for a student who committed suicide. So these things are not really abstract to me. So in response to those sorts of things, I try to turn my space, my classroom, and my forum into a kind of text where we act and interact with one another. And the guiding, for example, we only have one rule in my forum, and that's from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. And it's a line spoken by Portia, who's very wise because she's a woman. And women, as you know, are always the smartest characters in Shakespeare as in life. And she says, "Nothing is good I see without respect." But respect doesn't just mean to give something, to offer it due accord and due esteem. It also means context. So in answer to your question, I think the most important thing is to take the time with people to understand what the context is for your interaction. But the problem is that is incredibly inefficient, incredibly inefficient. And the crushing problem for a person like me who has this desire to join into this battle is that my inclination is to write parents and say, that sounds like an important problem. Come in and see me. But they want to take care of it through email. So what I need is face-to-face because that is not a full discussion. We're talking about something incredibly important. So for me, it involves trying to generate as much face-to-face conversation. To go back to my hero, Sherry Turkle, reclaiming conversation. She says we are not zombified past the point of no return. She thinks we can come back, but we do it by conversation.
I want to build on the last question and answer. I guess one of my thoughts is part of being human is trying to diminish discomfort and dealing with discomfort and going back to the hierarchy of needs. In order to get to the top level, the humanities, you have to be comfortable enough in what's going on or to be able to deal with uncomfortable things. So you talked on as an individual, how you try to do that in your own classroom with your students. What can the educational system do to really address that so students can really be able to take advantage of what you're describing?
Well, that's another brilliant question, and obviously that's something that a lot of smarter people, and a lot of people are smarter than me, have spent a lot of time addressing. But just from my perspective, as a teacher of the humanities in a very, very competitive college prep school, what I would say to you is that the system is rigged. It is rigged to try and generate an advantage for college admissions in such a way that students have no concept of how to present themselves. Regardless of how they present themselves, they are sure that they are unworthy. They are in a perpetual state of anxiety, self-doubt, and self-loathing even. This can't be what going to school for an education is ultimately about. So my first job as a teacher of seniors and sophomores, as a mentor and coach, is to try and tell students to tell the system to go to hell if they can afford to do it. And most of us can't, so what I try and teach them how to be double agents. To pretend to give the system what they want, but find ways of being human on the side. And reading and writing and playing music and playing sports and laughing and joking with one another. Stuff like that. Oh, I thought of another answer to both of your questions. I could really embarrass myself here. This is the first lesson that I give on day one. I teach kids a magic trick, and if they can keep the card and if they can produce it and do the magic trick at the end of the year, and I give them extra credit. It's the only extra credit that I give. And it's because when I was a student, there was a teacher who had us read Herzog, and we couldn't understand it, and then he came in and said, well, if you've read Moses and Monotheism, and I'm going, not fair. You should have put that, if I had read that, I would have known. So I realized then he wanted to stand up and be a magician. My job is to teach you how to do magic tricks. So what I want to do is to teach kids how to back palm a card, like that. And if they can do it at the end, then I've done my job. So that's how I try and do things. And that's how I try and teach things. All righty. Souvenir. Yeah.
Yes, here,
Oh, I'm sorry.
right here.
Oh, there you go. I'm sorry.
I enjoy history, and I firmly believe we don't know where we're going until we know where we came from. And I appreciate your hypothesis, and I agree with you completely. But my conflict comes in that there has been this conflict from generation to generation for as long as there have been thinking generations. And in those cultures where they stultify and become rigid about this is the way you do things, and any other way of doing things is wrong and punishable, have not grown, even though they might have lasted for centuries, as in China. But here we are at a point where so many of us disagree with what the current generation is trying to find out. And I think that perhaps we have to let them, as uncomfortable as it makes me to see kids with phones in front of their faces, I think that this is a problem that has to be worked out over time.
Thank you very much for that. My father being a history professor, I certainly appreciate your historical perspective on that. And you're absolutely right, is that when you were speaking, I was thinking of Thomas Kuhn's important book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and how, you know, we have paradigm changes in science, and we have paradigm changes throughout. I do, because I'm focusing on the topic of being human, I'm in the humanities. What I want to suggest that's different about this moment is AI. When you can create a machine that is absolutely indistinguishable from human interaction, then we have crossed an event horizon, I think, for the first time in human history. That's what I would argue. I would argue that, in fact, we are, for better or for worse, moving into something that is paradigmatically, exponentially new to us. And of course, I think we all agree about movement. I mean, if you don't stir something, then it settles, right? And then it tastes awful, at least if it's my tea. So I mean, I want to agree with you totally. But then I do want to say, my concern is when it comes to being human, this larger issue of the water that we swim in, I still want to argue that we are confronting something like at the end of 2001, A Space Odyssey. That it is, you know, it is new.
Thank you for a very good lecture.
Oh, that's nice of you.
And
Thank you.
I experienced it personally with my own son. He was a small child, only 3 years old, going to a Montessori school. And he was doing multiplication tables. And I talked to the teacher, and he knew how to multiply at 3. And I said, would you please kind of steer him towards the other things, because I want a well-rounded person. And she said, you're the first parent that has suggested that. We don't do that in Montessori. And well, he is now an engineer, so I guess. But
He probably built something cool that I use and love.
yeah,
Thank you.
But how does a parent do that in their own life? I've tried always to encourage them to other things,
Yeah.
and the arts and the different things. And I think maybe I did succeed in some ways.
Yeah.
But, you
Oh,
know,
no, I mean,
if a child is really strong in one area.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm a tennis player and not a swimmer for one reason, and that's that I don't swim well, but I actually am pretty decent as a tennis player. No, I mean, you raise an important question, and again, I'm playing a role. I've chosen to take a position that's intended to be controversial, but I would be willing to bet that I teach more science in my English class than than you get any kind of literary illusion in math or science. And I will tell you this, and I had to cut this out, but one of the questions I like to ask my students is what is light? Is it a wave or a particle? It's both, right? I mean, or at least it behaves as both. So sometimes when you look at light, you measure it as a photon, and sometimes in wavelengths. And so my question then is, well, how can science be so sloppy? You know, clean that up. But what I say is, no, actually, light is poetic. You know, scientists don't bother resolving that. You don't need to. Light is light, and you see the light, and that means something. So that's why our pilgrimage has to be to the light. No, I mean, math, too, at its highest levels, isn't it poetic? Infinity, the Mobius strip. I mean, these are phenomenal concepts. My issue has to do with privileging them. And not even privileging them. I've got no problem with the STEM funding being, I don't need all of the whiz-bang tools to do what I do. But what I need is people to understand that humanities is water. And that when we stop paying attention to the water, we could end up a fish out of water. And then we'll ask ourselves, how did we get here? Everything else to me is rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. I mean, how do you, I was just a little kid, but I still remember this phrase from the 60s, winning hearts and minds. I mean, are you going to bomb ISIS into absolute submission? My best friend is Iraqi. Is he my enemy because he is Muslim, or his mother was worshipped Allah? I mean, there has to be a culture as a safety net which keeps us from going beyond the point of no return. But we all know that culture doesn't always serve that purpose. Hitler was a painter. So I'm not making those claims. I mean, I don't want to claim that English makes people better people. Have you ever been to an English department sherry hour? Yeah.
I think with that, are we, so, thank you very much.
Thank you all.